Money is important, but money is just a resource. It's one resource. And what really hits me is there's a lot of other resources out there. And I hate to kind of keep using Seco as an example, but you have a network of people and a network of resources here. So just kind of as another example. When we look out to the west, we see Lake Michigan. That is a huge natural resource. So what I mean by that, resources are not just money. Now, I'm not saying resources aren't important, but money is just one of those resources. For example, if you have somebody that's going to give you valuable information because they believe in you, that's going to cost you $50,000 from somewhere else, that has value. That saves you something. A lesson that LaToya is going to be able to share with you, that has value. Now, it might not necessarily be, she might, do it as a donation, or she might give you, do it at market rate, whatever it may be, but that has value. I remember I was down in Georgia. We had this little lake property down there. So I was sitting down there and I was kind of in like a little funk, in a little mood. Down there by myself. My brother called it my Ernest Hemingway period of time, because I was just kind of out there looking at the water, just writing and kind of just getting my mind clear and things along that line. And it hit me. I was like, I don't have anybody around me right now. And so my point about resources is, my aunt called me maybe like 15, 20 minutes after that. She's like, baby, she's like, I cooked. She's like, I fried some chicken. She's like, I know you like my fried chicken. She's like, I cooked for you. Come eat. And what I mean by that, if I would have had $50,000 in my bank account, $100,000 in my bank account, or whatever at that time, that would make me feel good. But knowing that I had family that cared about me and was willing to say, you know what, I haven't talked to Brent in 4 or 5 days. Let me check on him to see how he's doing. That has value to me. That money's not necessarily going to make me feel any better or any worse. Now, I might be able to go out and buy a new this or new that, or get a tailored suit or whatever it may be. But that's only one aspect of it. So, yes, this is important, but don't look at it as the end-all be-all. One of the things I've shared with so many clients, and even a team of people that I work with, is me, and again, take this with a grain of salt. I don't almost take anything I say with a grain of salt, because everything needs to apply to your life as it needs to be. But I'm more interested in ideas. I'm more interested in ideas than money. What I mean by that, I'm convinced that you can find money and resources, but there's not necessarily a huge amount of really, really good ideas out there. Now, it doesn't mean that other people don't have good ideas, but as most of you guys can attest to, you guys had an idea that was massaged and brought up. That's where the value is. That's what makes your transportation company different than another one, because of the ideas and the unique spin you're able to put on that.
Preach on, brother.
I would also like to add to Jose's point with anxiety with money and not having enough when you're in budgets. But once you start seeing it, and once the money starts coming in, you go through this period where you kind of establish in your mind, like, I don't got it, but I understand that that's nothing. That's not a lot of money. So after a while, where sometimes if we don't have it, 2,000 may seem like a lot. But as an entrepreneur, once the money starts flowing in and you see more and more of it, even when you don't have it, you'll get in a mindset that you understand that, yeah, I don't have it and I'm short, but it's not a lot, So it's kind of right, it's temporary. It's not a lot, like, well, yeah, I'm short by 5,000, and in a sense of not being an entrepreneur and not seeing that type of money, you might feel as though, that's a lot of money, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? But once you get into the flow of seeing it and you're short, you have to look at it like, well, I've seen more than this before. So it's really not a lot, and you're able to work through that by recognizing the fact that you've seen it before and acknowledging the fact that, okay, it's 5,000, yeah, it's a lot because I don't have it in the bank, but it's really not, So that's always helped me,
And then with the idea, you can help make more money by putting that idea in place. So
right.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the other things to add to it, like a lot of times, I mentioned about good ideas and passions. One of the things Jose mentions quite a bit. Because I'm numbers-based and training, a lot of me really wants to kind of dig into the numbers quite a bit. But one of the things I run into a lot of businesses is I want to do this just because. And I've actually had some kind of pushback from certain clients. I don't want to say arguments with certain clients, but they want to do this just because. But yet a lot of them get into it and don't realize the mistakes that they've made. And so again, what this is really about it's an opportunity to say, am I willing to take this risk or not? Because any project or any business is really about risk. And so a lot of these assumptions, thinking and stuff like along that lines to say, am I willing to take this risk? It's one thing to say, you know what, I'm gonna start a business, and again, I had a restaurant. It's one thing to say, I wanna start a restaurant and do it just because, and it's a whole nother to understand what that means. What that's gonna cost you, how much you think you're gonna make, just kind of case in point. I've had a few clients that I've worked with that said, you know what, I've always wanted to open a restaurant. And so one of the first questions that I ask, especially when it's individuals that are already working a normal job and they're like really trying to quit their job and jump out and do that, I say, okay, well, how much money do you need to kind of sustain your lifestyle? Like if you have kids, if you have family, whatever it may be. So let's say, again, we're on the low end, let's say you need $30,000 comfortably to live your life, you know, more or less, whatever it may be. And so you kind of back into, well, how many cakes do you need to sell to make that? How many hamburgers do you need to sell to make that? How many slabs of rib do you need to make that? And if you think about, when you actually kind of back into those numbers of how many you need to sell, a lot of people are kind of blown away. So for example, again, I'll just use, it's kind of a basic example. But let's say we're selling hamburger plates for $5, just for the sake of discussion. And you figure that, you know, a markup and multiple, let me use the easy number, 6. So normally at restaurants, markers don't like me today. Normally at restaurants, people do a 3 times markup. Good restaurants should probably do 3.5 to 4%, but just for easy math, again, we're gonna do the 3 times markup. So a 3 times markup for a $6 plate, to give you an example, what that would break down to is $2 of that is supposed to cover labor, $2 of that covers the cost of the food, or what they call cost of goods sold, labor. And then another 2 is just kind of like overhead. So overhead and profit, which usually only winds up being $10. Your labor, let's say this is what you pay yourself with. So again, I'm dancing, and I know sometimes that I forget that I'm a numbers guy, so sometimes I do talk a little fast. So we'll back into this a little bit. So again, let's just use basic math again. So let's say the company you worked at before, you made $1,000 a week. So $1,000 a week is how much a year? 52,000. Okay. So 52,000. So we'll back that into 1,000 a week. I was like, you see, you find me a better marker.
Yeah.
So $1,000 a week. Now, if we say, okay, we're going to pay ourselves $2 from every hamburger that we sell. And I need to make $1,000 a week just to cover myself. That's not counting anybody else. Just how many hamburgers do I need to sell if I'm making $2 profit off each one, just to cover me? 500 hamburgers a week. And if we're open 7 days a week, let's just use easy math again. Let's say we're open 5 days a week. So that means we need to sell 100 hamburgers a day. And I'm the type of person, I'll break that down and say, well, how many is that an hour? We're open 10 hours a day. Okay, we need to sell 10 hamburgers an hour to cover just me. Now you might say, okay, yeah, I can do that. 10 hamburgers an hour isn't a big deal. But I've had other clients where the number they needed to hit, they needed to sell, just for sake of discussion, like 1,000 hamburgers a day or something like that to hit the numbers they want to do. And when they actually look at it in that amount of detail, they're like, whoa, this is a lot more than what I thought. Especially if you started out maybe doing this out of your home or as a part-time job. So for example, let's say, I know a lot of people would like to bake. I know people that bake cakes. So let's say right now you make $3,000 a year on the side selling cakes. Now for you to quit your job and go do that, you might need to sell $300,000 worth of cakes. So to go from $3,000 in cakes, which, I don't know, maybe it's 100 cakes, which is still good side money. I'm not, everybody, does a little side thing. But to say, okay, I'm selling 100 cakes a year to now I need to sell 10,000 cakes a year, is that realistic? And so that's what the assumption stuff comes into. You can assume that, hey, I can sell 10,000, but let's really talk about that as a team. Let's talk about that with your business partner and say, what's feasible? Now you might say, you know what I need to get to make this profitable for me is I need to be able to sell 10,000 cakes or 10,000 donuts or whatever a year. But you might say, you know what? Realistically, it's going to take me a while to get to that level. So maybe what I should do, instead of me jumping out tomorrow and spending $1,500 on a lease for a building, that I need to continue to kind of do this on the side and maybe grow it a little bit. So instead of me doing it 5 hours a week, I do it 10 hours a week. how can I be creative? And so sometimes it might take you 2, 3, 4 years to get to that level where you're actually able to quit your day job and to do this full time. And so a lot of what this is about isn't telling you to do it or not to do it, but it's just saying, are you comfortable taking this risk? Some people might say, you know what, this is a passion that I've always had. My grandmother taught me this recipe. I hate my job. I'm quitting it. I'm going out on faith, whatever it may be. I'm not saying do or don't do it, but just know what you're getting into. To know to quit a $50,000 a year job to make that, plus pay people, plus pay utilities, it's like, okay, what do you really need to make to cover that? And if we're saying utilities and all this other stuff, and this is kind of what the budget's about, which Charté would bring up. Everyone here that has a business, some of us have more overhead than others. So us that have consulting companies, I mean, our overhead is probably phones, maybe mileage, things along that line. But if you have a building, that's it, man. And you have a staff at the child care with, how many other people that is. You have staffing issues, maintenance issues. Every business is a little bit different. So that's kind of what a lot of this budgeting is about, is to say, okay, what do I need to break even? And that's another kind of another worksheet, break even worksheet. That's it. So, go ahead.
Well, go ahead.
Okay, so I was going to say, so let's say we have a business, and again, I'm just going to use kind of basic numbers again. Let's say we had a business that all the monthly, what they call fixed expenses. Does anybody understand when I say fixed expense, what that means?
Calvin,
Bills that you pay every month.
Calvin, what's a fixed expense?
Whatever you spend inside the business is gonna try to stay at that level.
It's gonna stay what?
At that level.
What do you mean stay at that level? Explain a little deeper.
It's like your overhead.
Yeah, it's like your rent, you pay, you wanna.
Yeah, I guess to kind of elaborate on, usually there winds up being two kind of expenses. You have fixed expenses and variable expenses. So if I say variable, that should probably tell you what the difference is. So if I say variable expense, can you guys think of what I mean by that? And give me maybe 1 or 2 examples. So what?
Something about to change.
Something that changes. So a fixed expense is like you're gonna have to pay that no matter what. A good example, you kind of mentioned like your rent or your mortgage on your property. So if you have no cars coming that month, or if you have 20,000 cars coming that month, you have to pay your rent, or you have to pay your mortgage, and let's say that's $1,000, whatever it may be. So a fixed expense, again, it just means it's fixed every month. It's not going to change. You know your insurance is always going to be $200 a month. You know your mortgage is always going to be this. Yeah. Variable means, to go to his point, is basically it can fluctuate. And then technically it's supposed to fluctuate depending on the usage or the demand. So for example, an example of a variable expense sometimes can be a utility. So for example, if you have one person in your adult home, they're only going to use so much water, so much electricity, but if you have 10 people in that home, they're going to use a lot more, so it should fluctuate. Another example would be, if we're using a baking example, your flour and your sugar and all that is going to vary depending on how many cupcakes you sell. If you sell 10 cupcakes this month, you're not necessarily going to buy $300 worth of flour. And if you sell 10,000 cupcakes, you're not necessarily going to buy $300 worth of flour either. It's going to fluctuate and vary depending on what you do.
So how do you determine your price per production so you get to that fixed
That's
variable?
That's pretty.
Well, yeah, and what he mentioned was price per production, and basically that's really applicable to a lot of different things. But specifically, what that does is kind of help you estimate and budget what your costs are going to be. So most of us here aren't really probably doing products necessarily. I mean, we're kind of consulting based. But just give you an example. So again, if we were in a restaurant or a bakery, it winds up being an equation where it's like break even, but it's basically your fixed costs. It's actually revenue minus fixed costs minus your variable costs. So basically, you take all your fixed costs and add those up, and then you subtract what your variable costs are going to be. So you kind of do an assumption that, you know what, if I sell 100 of these, what do my numbers look like? And I'm probably doing a bad job describing it right now, but that's really what it boils down to, saying, hey, what are my fixed costs, and then what are my costs per variable unit, and then you basically do a calculation that tells you how many you have to sell to do that. So for example, if you assume you're going to sell 100 cakes, what does that look like? Does that cover your expenses? If your 100 cakes has let's say you sell a cake for $50, and 20% of that is a variable cost of goods, that's $10 of that, or excuse me, $10 that goes towards paying that down. And then you have to factor what are my fixed costs. So for example, in a lot of restaurants, people, actually probably businesses in general, a but people actually look at labor as a variable cost as well. So a lot of times, who's here has worked like retail before? So have you ever had it where like, oh, you know what, we didn't hit our sales numbers, so you can go home early today? That's kind of why they do that. They do that to keep it a variable cost. And so they have these calculations say, whoa, based on our sales today, our payroll is now 35% of what we brought in, and we need to keep that number at 30% so you can go home early. There's other people that are like, you know what, I'm just assuming that I got to pay these people $500 a week, whether nobody comes in or somebody does come in. So again, there's not necessarily a right or wrong per se. It's just like how much detail do you want to go into? Because I mean, you can take this, you can keep going all the way down to this level. Just to kind of give you another example, like when I had my restaurant, I could tell you every day what each plate of ribs came out of there would cost me. And I don't mean just the ribs. I'm talking the sauce. Like I broke my sauce recipe down. Like, you know, I had it in an Excel spreadsheet. Like, you know, it's 1 gallon of this. At this price is this, and I said, okay, now every ounce of sauce cost me this much because I did all these calculations. And I would tell you the meats fluctuated every day, and I would tell you on Tuesday what my meat cost was, on Thursday what my meat cost, on Friday what my meat cost was. I would tell you what the trays were that I got from Sam's Club or GFC or a GFS or whatever it may be. I mean, I went down to that much detail. There's some other people that be like, you know what, I'm just gonna assume that the meat cost me $5 and I'm gonna mark it up for 20. But me, because I'm a numbers guy, like I would know that whole tray coming out of there cost me $4.82 today. Yesterday it cost me $4.75, and I'm selling it for 20. There's not a right or wrong to it. Like I'm just a numbers nerd like that. Plus, I was able to kind of set it up in Excel where I could easily go in and do these changes. So like when Shartea mentioned doing an updated budget, once you've used Excel or QuickBooks or whatever it may be, you can take what you did the first pass and just really update that. So you might want to save a new version. So you have your 2014 version, now you have a 2015 version that you go in and update. You say, you know what, now I know a little bit better of how much I'm gonna make per person. I have a better idea of what my utilities are gonna be. Another kind of budgeting thing, a lot of times you get people that do an annual budget, which definitely does help, but for me, I actually a lot of times take it almost to a weekly budget, and it can be kind of tedious. And usually at the very least I do a monthly budget, but here's an example. We talked about utilities, and I know we talked about making it as a fixed cost, but if we looked at utilities from a variable expense, when would utilities be more or less in certain times of the year? So for example, right now in the winter, most likely your utility bill is gonna be up a lot higher. So for me, I wanna look at month over month and season over season, how do things change. Now I might still tally that up and say, okay, for the whole year, this is what it looks like, but I want to know how things look over time. Because, for example, if in the winter, and let's say my business just barely was making $1,000 a month profit, just for sake of discussion, you know, after I paid everything off, you know, during the good days, during the summer. But if in the winter, all of a sudden I spent an extra $1,500 on my utilities, but I didn't get any new money in, I'm actually dead in the water $500, or I have to come out of my bank account $500 to cover that. If I'm just looking at my annual numbers, I'm not going to catch that. Whereas if I look at it on a monthly basis, I'm going to be able to say, whoa, you know, my expenses are jumping month over month. Again, for restaurants, a lot of times you see in the winter you might have a little bit more uptake because people can't necessarily grill outside and things along that line. My guess with cars, you probably have some variation in cars. I know sometimes, you know, maybe there's more accidents in the winter, you know what I'm saying? So you assume that you're going to have more cars coming in the winter to deal with accidents. Other people in the summer is a slow time for them because people are on vacation or whatever it may be. So for me, I do like to look at that amount of detail and say, you know, how can I kind of budget and make sure that I have enough cash cushion to kind of keep me floating. What I want to add to that as well, and this, I saw this a lot when I worked with clients writing their business plans, but because so much of this is part of your business planning as well, I realized that, and this kind of goes to Jose's point, that a lot of people do get nervous about money and not understanding it. But what I see over and over, so many of us as business owners, we actually know a lot more about our businesses than we've been into. And part of it is just fear, maybe part of it we don't really want to say, or we're just not sure. Like a lot of what the issues is with these is people don't know what they're supposed to look like. They don't understand what profit and loss is really supposed to look like. They don't understand what a balance sheet is truly supposed to look like. They don't understand what a cash flow statement is supposed to look like. They don't understand what sources and uses is supposed to look like. But what I mean by look like is just how it's supposed to be set up. It's not that they don't necessarily understand, you know, you might not know what I meant by fixed expense and variable expense, but you know what I mean by food, utilities, gas, things along that line. And so a lot of it is just getting people comfortable that, you know what, you actually know more about your business than you think you do.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of times, I've seen this time and time again. Again, I'm talking about business plans and all, but it is related. That I've sat down with the client, and they were like, I don't even know where to start with my business plan. I don't know where to write. I don't know what to write for my budgeting. And I put out my recorder on my phone. I could talk to them for 2 hours, and almost 9 times out of 10, almost their whole business plan, or at least 80% of it, is right there.
Preach on, brother.
Their numbers are right there. So if I walk into somebody and say, what is it going to cost to start this business? Almost every time, I don't know, I have no idea. A lot more than I have. Well, what? Well, I don't know. It's just a lot. But if I actually say, okay, well, tell me about your idea. Why did you get into pennies? What about it interests you? These little pieces come out like, well, I actually get the get the stuff donated to me, and I put this much in upgrade costs and whatever it may be. When I really just let people sit and talk about their business, there's actually winds up being a huge amount of it. But again, because a lot of times people don't know how to capture that, and they don't know how to put it down, that they're really, really intimidated by that. So that's actually one of the things that I enjoy doing, and I think the Seiko team enjoys doing, is actually just allowing you to be able to capture that and feel comfortable capturing that. And to feel comfortable, you always hear there's no stupid questions, but sometimes us as entrepreneurs, and I've noticed this about myself, we have to be kind of the expert and the professional all the time. A lot of us don't know how to let our guard down and be like, I don't know about this. And so that's one of the things that organizations and a network like this allows us to do, is say, I might be really, really good at budgeting, and I know something about real estate, but if I need a real estate expert, I can pick his brain about it. Or I need someone to help me with leadership development and things along that line. And the old me, probably 5 or 6 years ago, I didn't really want to admit that I needed help with stuff. Like the way I was brought up, and just, being my personality type, whatever it may be, it's kind of like a sign of weakness. And I still see that with a lot of entrepreneurs I work with. It's like, a lot of people you don't really want to show your hand a lot of times, because you're like, I don't want this person to use that against me. I don't want to admit that I don't really know what a fixed cost and a variable cost is. I don't want to admit that I didn't put a budget together. I don't want to admit this. But a lot of us, we're all out here trying to make it together, and again, I'm here presenting a piece of it I know, but these roles can be completely flipped. I can sit down and learn just as much from you about your respective expertise and your respective businesses, no problem at all. So much of what we're doing here is just kind of give you guys a general introduction about this budgeting and financial modeling and things along that line. But if you do have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. We do have kind of the general email address right here. You can email that, and most of you guys have our contact information anyway. And I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to help you to do tomorrow or anything along that line, because we do get swamped quite a bit. But that's what we're here to do, is just kind of give you a general background, figure out what type of questions and concerns are there.